Hey, how's it going, everyone? Welcome back to a new week. So you know what that means? It's a new episode, and I am not alone here, as I generally am not. However, we are riding with three today. Of course, I have Mr. Justice General with me, as always. Justice, how you doing?
I'm great, man. Awesome. Thank you for having me on your show again. I appreciate that, man.
Always. Somebody has to hold my hand through the whole behind the scenes process. So I'm learning it. But that doesn't mean that you're going to be gone from the show anytime soon. Any of the shows anytime soon. You know, I love doing these with you. And as I mentioned, we do have a third this week for the second ever episode of the Rust Belt Report here on the Buffalo Fan Base. It's a name and a face that if you don't recognize, I'm sorry, but I don't know what rock you're living under. This man has been all over our news feed, in our Twitter timeline for a while now, and I think a lot of us in the Bills content creator community and the Bills Mafia community has kind of been there and seen his rise to where he is today, and we're very grateful for the coverage that he provides. It is host of the Shout podcast and Bills beat reporter for Syracuse.com. It is at Matt Parino. Matt, thank you so much for A, saying yes, and B, being here and doing this. I sincerely appreciate it. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Ryan. It's good to meet you as well, Justice, and talk some Bills for a little while. I mean, it definitely is my day job, but I never get tired of doing it and doing these shows. And when you DM me about this, and I kind of looked at it a little bit and figured out that this was Bills Mafia, a Buffalo fan base podcast. I was like, yeah, I'm all in. Del Reed's my guy.
Yeah.
It's a fun time. So let's get going.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and we have Justice to thank for that. Well, he's actually on this side of my screen, but we have Justice to thank for that, for making the connections and getting, myself, Jake Jordan, Caveman, and the 500
You work
other
hard for
content
it, bro. You
creators.
deserve it.
Yeah, you
Stop.
the 500 other content creators you pulled out of thin air, and you're like, this is it. We've made a network. So, I got to thank you for that. But speaking of the Bills, it felt like this happened rather fast this morning. This doesn't directly impact the Buffalo Bills, but it felt like it happened rather fast this morning, and that is Tyreek Hill was traded from the Kansas City Chiefs to the Miami Dolphins. Reportedly, it was between the Dolphins and the Jets. Unless you talk to Tyreek Hill, in which case he doesn't know who the New Jersey Jets are. If you watched his presser, but Tyreek Hill is, as of earlier this afternoon, a Miami Dolphin and no longer a Kansas City Chief. So I wanted to talk about that. And Matt, your first time with me and Justice, I don't really like to put a whole lot of context on these conversations, so we can form it to whatever we want, how it impacts the Bills, how it impacts the AFC. So I'm going to turn it over to you because you are the guest, and you can talk about this in whatever popped into your head either today when you started following the news, or now that it's already happened. So Tyreek Hill is a Miami Dolphin. Matt, I'm going to turn it over to you.
So first things first, it's all happened so fast that I don't blame you for saying that it happened this morning when indeed it happened yesterday, because nobody's actually had a second to kind of really, catch their breath
Process.
over the last 14 days and process. That's a great word. Like all the crazy big time moves that have happened in the NFL. I mean, I feel like I'm covering the NBA all of a sudden with the way that all these high profile players are changing teams. I had, two thoughts initially. Number one, this definitely puts, a lot more pressure on Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce in that Kansas City offense, which I think is going to look a lot different now without Tyreek Hill there. They go out and they sign Marcus Valdez-Scantling, which I think was a nice, quick move for a quick, fast player that's not a Tyreek Hill, but somebody that you can get into your program with Juju Smith-Schuster and some of the other weapons that they're going to probably put around Patrick Mahomes coming up in the draft. Obviously, they got a big draft haul, so that offense is going to look a lot different. And if from a Bills perspective, over the last 2 seasons, your season has ended at Arrowhead, and one of the major reasons why has been Tyreek Hill. So now he leaves the Chiefs, which I think is a good thing if you're a Bills fan, right? Like if you run into Kansas City again, maybe that offense isn't as dynamic, but he comes in to the division, the AFC East, and you're gonna have to play against him 2 times a year. The thing though is the quarterback situation in Miami is it's very suspect at the moment. I want to be
Okay,
respectful as much as I can, but like, listen, I've watched Tua quite a bit over the last 2 seasons, and he's a guy coming out that, you know, I liked a lot of what I saw from him at Alabama, and it just hasn't really materialized. I think coming back from that injury, he's never really been right. He's working hard right now. He has an opportunity with an offense just littered with talent around him, but I'll believe it when I see it with what they're going to kind of ask him to do and if he can execute it in this offense. Tyreek Hill makes the Miami Dolphins offense better, you know, exponentially better. I think that they're the clear-cut number 2 team in the AFC East, but I still think they have some room between them and the Buffalo Bills. I could see this being a move, maybe not for 2022 for the Dolphins, but maybe 2023, whether it be getting one of those, you know, they still have 2 first-round picks in 2023. Maybe they try to move up and get that quarterback of the future in that draft. Maybe they try to position to bring in a better elite quarterback in a year from now. But, you know, Tua is probably going to have every opportunity until they take those opportunities away and maybe give the keys over to Teddy Bridgewater. We'll see. But a lot of pressure now on that Miami Dolphins team.
Yeah, and a lot of people, Justus, before I let you talk about this, a lot of people have assumed or have kind of, you know, hypothesized that Tua is going to get benched halfway through this season and Teddy Bridgewater is going to start. I don't know necessarily how true that is, especially with everything we saw in the offseason with the Brian Flores lawsuit and some of the things that were coming out from the Miami Dolphins organization, where Chris Greer, the GM, and the owner, Stephen Ross, were like really big on Tua. And Flores was reportedly really big on trying to get Deshaun to come into Miami. But yeah, I mean, the quarterback situation was what I was going to bring up because, you know, as Bills fans, we know the wide receiver, the talent around a quarterback helps, but it doesn't make the quarterback. In fact, it can almost be argued that it's the reverse. With a good quarterback, you can make some.
Can y'all keep him quiet, please?
some average talent around you look really, really insane. A good example of that being Isaiah McKenzie was in Denver prior to coming to Buffalo. He wasn't really viewed as that much of like a, I guess, like star wide receiver. And now, you know, he's stuck around Buffalo, going from being a starter on the offense to special teams, and then, you know, making his way back in with re-signing for more than a year this year. So, you know, the quarterback definitely helps with the talent that you're bringing in. And I mean, Miami's done an insanely good job of surrounding Tua with talent, because you not only have Tyreek Hill, but you also have Jalen Waddle. You have Myles Gaskin at running back. And I mean, those are just some of the names off the top of my head, but you know, it's some really good offensive talent that they have around him. So we'll see. I would agree. I was going to use fluid for the quarterback situation in Miami, just because, you know, it's been pretty fluid between having Tua in there and then Fitzpatrick and then Tua in there full time. And he had some good performances and some not good performances. But Justus, hopefully Matt and I have not stolen all of your thunder, but go ahead and talk about the fact that Tyreek Hill is now in Miami. What are you thinking about? Because we gotta face them twice a year.
Right. First, I don't know if you guys heard that, but I do have a mic that tends to, so it has like a mute function, and it tends to not work at the most inopportune time. So if you guys heard that, I apologize. Secondly, as far as Tyreek Hill being in, you know, with the Dolphins, I feel like, you know, you guys took the Dolphins route, you know, pretty thoroughly. And I feel like it's a much bigger deal as far as the Chiefs go, because I feel like the Chiefs have been our kryptonite for whatever reason. Like, I feel like we've been a better team than them for a while now. And, you know, the fact that they were able to just do what they did and pull it off in the playoffs the way they did, it's always in a heartbreaking fashion. And, you know, it felt like it was just like one of those monkeys we couldn't get off our back. Even when we beat them in the regular season, it was like a really big deal. So to have that be another thing that, you know, stopped us from reaching our goal this year, it felt like, you know, a little demoralizing, especially it being the same team, you know, because you still have that monkey on your back at the end of the day. So for Tyreek Hill not to be on that team, I feel like that makes that team a lot less dynamic. It really cripples that team in a way, in my opinion, because I feel like Tyreek Hill really just is one of those players where, like, you have to know where he is on the field at all times, you know. So because he could take the ball at any point on the field and score with it, literally. And I feel like having something like that is an extreme weapon to have, especially when you're as good as Patrick Mahomes. I'm not saying he's not good when I say that Josh Allen is better. I think Josh Allen had to do more with less and still was just as, if not more productive. So that's why I think Josh Allen, and he can do more, just simply he's a better quarterback in my opinion. So it's not to diminish, what I think of Patrick Mahomes. I still think he's a really good quarterback, but without Tyreek Hill on your team, there is no replacement for Tyreek Hill. Jamar Chase, but you're not going to get Jamar Chase, so there's no replacement for Tyreek Hill. So now we're going to kind of see what Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs look like, when they can't rely on Tyreek Hill all the time, or lean on him at the very least. And the defense has always been a little suspect at times. And Travis Kelce is obviously the man, but having Tyreek Hill on the field really gives Travis Kelce a lot of opportunity. So I think defenses will be keying in on Travis Kelce at this point. And Tyreek Hill's not there. So Juju Smith-Schuster, I feel like, made that wide receiver room worse, in my opinion. So I don't really trust him to be wide receiver number one. If you said they signed Valdez Scantling, so I'm still not confident in that wide receiver room. Tight end, maybe the top two of this generation, but I don't know if that is enough for them to be a contender, a Super Bowl contender at the very least, in this stacked AFC anymore. So I think I would much rather have that beast of a player allocated somewhere else where he's not as much of a threat, rather than for him to be on Kansas City where he's an ultimate threat. So I'm very happy with the trade, ultimately, to say the least. I think, does it make Miami better? Absolutely. Does it make Miami even close to being contenders as far as, I feel like we have the best top to bottom roster in the entire NFL. So I don't think Miami's close, but it does make them better. But again, as Matt pointed out, they don't have the quarterbacking, especially not to the level of Patrick Mahomes. So I'm very happy with the deal. I feel like it knocks out a heavyweight in the AFC.
Well, to be able to get the ball out of the quarterback's hand, the quarterback has to be standing upright. And we're going to talk about the fact that the Bills address that pretty heavily here in a minute. But I just also wanted to bring up the Chiefs also lost Byron Pringle. He signed with Chicago in this free agency. So a pretty big, late in the season addition that they had. He's a fast guy. Justus, when we did, I think it was an Armchair GMs episode, I was talking about the fact, I wanted if the Bills were going to target a wide receiver in free agency, I was looking at James Washington and Byron Pringle, who were fast guys. Pringle, I think, is a little bit faster than Washington, but fast guys who can catch the ball and make an immediate impact on this offense. And so he ended up leaving too. I like MVS as well. He played in Green Bay most recently, but he's definitely not a Tyreek Hill replacement. And then finally, my final thought on that, because I think Matt was about to say something. I lived in PA for 4 years. So I watched I watched as much Steelers football as I did Bills football, and Juju is a really good wide receiver too. When AB left and he stepped into that wide receiver one position, it got exponentially harder for him. And that's the name of the game, right? Your wide receiver one is most likely going to draw your double coverage. They're going to open it up for other guys. We saw that in the playoffs where Gabe Davis had 4 touchdowns in the playoff game because Diggs had 7 yards and he was drawing all the targets away from him. So it's definitely a slightly depleted Chiefs offense. But I do think that this is the beginning of the end, I guess you would say, for the Chiefs, because they're starting to hit some of those monetary restrictions. Because as much as people like to say the cap is not real, you just saw Tyreek Hill, who I'm sure Kansas City would have opted to have kept, get traded to Miami. And Matt, you were going to say something before. I apologize for cutting you off, but go ahead.
Oh, no, you're fine. You're fine. I'm going to push back a little bit here, play a little devil's advocate.
All right,
I
I like
think
it.
we're not putting enough respect on Holmes' name. Listen, the thing in this league, you have to constantly reinvent yourself, especially over the last decade. Like I feel like offenses have become so complicated, defenses have become so complicated that if you do the same thing over and over again from a scheme standpoint or a personnel standpoint, eventually teams figure you out. And I think over the course of this season, if you watch Kansas City from start to finish, there were times when this offense with a healthy Tyreek Hill in it, not executing, not being as productive as it's been over the last couple of years. Tyreek Hill just turned 28 years old. Receivers don't get better as they close in on 30. So what I think Kansas City was looking at here was either giving 73 million guaranteed to Tyreek Hill, who's going to turn 31 by the end of that guarantee, or moving on, reinventing yourself and building around the cornerstone of your franchise, which is Patrick Mahomes. And I think this is the year to do it. Now the Kansas City Chiefs have, right? For the most part, they're going to probably have their pick of a couple really good receivers at that spot. And if they're getting worried about maybe one of those receivers going earlier on, maybe Garrett Wilson goes at 10, and you're wondering, okay, is there going to be a run at receiver? You package those two together and you move up to get the receiver that you want, whether it be Jameson Williams, Chris Olave, Jahan Dotson, who I think could be the perfect kind of fit to the next iteration of a receiver in that offense. So I don't think this is the beginning of the end of Kansas City. I think it's going to be a challenge. In 2022, they're not the same team, and they're in a division now with a bunch of heavyweight hitters. I mean, Russell Wilson, Justin Herbert, Derek Carr now with Devontae Adams. You could sell me on the Chiefs finishing fourth in that division. I don't think that would be crazy. But to kind of say that the beast is dead, I think that they're just in the very beginning stages of reimagining what this could look like. I think they probably figure it out, and I still think they have, if not the best quarterback in the league, because I do agree with you. I'd probably put Josh Allen, after what we just saw in the playoffs, slightly ahead of Patrick Mahomes, but he's 1B for me, if not 1A.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And to your point, I actually agree with you. I think that Andy Reid is a genius. We've seen him build multiple Super Bowl teams, caliber teams, and so I have no doubt that he'll be able to do it again. So when I say that it knocks out a heavyweight, I just mean for like this year specifically, for our path to win a Super Bowl. So I don't think that like the Chiefs are like non-contenders forever anymore, or anything like that. But I do think for us to win a Super Bowl this year, not having a team to look at that we have that monkey on our back at, as one of the top teams, I feel like bodes well for us because all these other teams, like it's just another team. It's not anybody who we have like this weird rivalry with, where it's more disappointing, or it means more than any other game for it. So I just think that bodes well for us.
The bigger story for me than even this Tyreek Hill thing, and it started a couple months ago, as we started to see a month ago when we started to see some of the player movement. You're going to be in an absolute slugfest when you get to the playoffs. I mean, the top 7 teams in the AFC, it's going to be a murderer's row. I mean, you're going to have to probably play against elite quarterback after elite quarterback all the way through. And that's after, a pretty grind of a season, which I think the AFC East is going to be, to a degree better than it was a season ago. I don't think it's going to be as easy of a run. I still don't think it's obviously as competitive as the AFC West, but Deshaun Watson going to Cleveland. What's Mitchell Trubisky going to look like in Pittsburgh? There's so many good quarterbacks and so many good offenses in the AFC that we could see a lot. Now, I think the Bills defense is going to be better, and we could probably get into Von Miller a little bit too. That could be a good transition. But I think that to be great in the AFC now, you have to have an elite quarterback, which the Bills do. But every game has the potential to be a shootout. And a lot of pressure is going to be on Von Miller and this defense to have a better performance than they did a year ago, which I think if they play, get a couple more stops, we're talking about a completely different scenario, the 2021 season.
Yeah, so that is a perfect transition, Matt. Thank you for that. But just to end that conversation, because we were talking, just to finish that off, because we were talking about these massive player movements. Drew Rosenhaus came out today, and I mean, we all know the name. If you pay you know, you don't even have to pay in-depth attention to the NFL in the offseason. I mean, the man represents some of the biggest names in professional football. He said that this is not the last of the like blockbuster major player moves that we're going to see this season. So, I mean, I don't think a lot of people saw, you know, like we alluded to, not a lot of people saw Tyreek Hill leaving Kansas City. I don't think Tyreek Hill saw Tyreek Hill leaving Kansas City. And, you know, like I said, a lot of it came out this morning, but Matt, as you said, it kind of really started last night. So thank you for that correction. But to know that there's going to be more, it's like, okay, now who else is going to be on the move? You know what I mean? So, and especially anything that now has to do with the AFC, because it is so just completely stacked with talent. And speaking of that talent, and speaking of quarterbacks and their weapons, the Buffalo Bills, it kind of unexpectedly, but happily, signed Von Miller, who on his draft night thought he was coming to Buffalo versus Denver. And during this past week said that really Buffalo is going to be the place that he would have to go to if he was going to be, you know, coaxed out of leaving Los Angeles and the Rams that just won a Super Bowl. So Von Miller is a Bill. I will admit, I already did the, you know, Von Miller jersey purchase that isn't going to be here for another 3 months. I don't know, because it's going to take that long, but it's not going to be here for 3 months, but I do have a Von Miller jersey on the way. So, you know, I am one of those suckers that goes out and does that immediately. But, you know, I obviously a lot of Bills fans are happy. I mean, this is a guy who is compared to one of the Bills greats for the entirety of his career in Bruce Smith. And he's now in Buffalo. And he's aware of Bruce Smith. Bruce Smith is aware of him. Apparently, Bruce Smith was part of the recruiting process for bringing him here, as was Diggs and a couple other players on the Bills. But as he said, it was very hard for him to make that decision to leave Los Angeles. And it wasn't until he saw the facilities and met the people and talked to some of the Bills players that he really felt like he could, as he said, smile again. Buffalo is now definitely that free agent destination, especially for these big name free agents. Matt, what does bringing a player like Von Miller into the Buffalo Bills organization do, not just talent wise, but also, you know, culture and character wise, because we know that's so important to this franchise.
Yeah, what's interesting, the most interesting part of all this is the news that came out that Von, who basically told everybody himself at his press conference, he approached the Bills. I mean, he saw what the Bills were building and watched Josh Allen in the playoffs and said, you know what, they almost drafted me. I'm going to go mess around, and if they got the money, I'm going to go join that team. The funniest thing to me, and I've said this on multiple shows, so apologize if somebody's seen me on another show and this is repeating it. You know, when you win a Super Bowl or a world championship, like a World Series title, there's always that fear that a team's going to have that letdown the year after, right? You make it to the top of the mountain, you get to the next year, and it's just a little bit harder to get up every day for work, knowing that, you know, we already accomplished our massive goal. There's a lot of times that's why repeating championships in pro sports, it's really hard to do. And what this move told me the most about Von Miller was he wants to run it back. He wants to win another championship. And I think joining the Bills, a team on the rise that I think he kind of even alluded to it, probably should have won the Super Bowl if that 13 seconds doesn't happen. I think that he's encouraged and almost motivated by that. And that tells you a lot about the competitive side of Von Miller. I mean, he's leaving a situation where he was rushing the passer next to arguably the greatest defensive player of all time in Aaron Donald. And so now he comes here. And one of the things he also made a point to mention in his press conference was he obviously knows what he brings as a pass rusher, and his ability to play this game is obviously the thing that teams want. But a 1B to that, if you will, is his ability to be a leader, to set the culture in the building. I mean, music to the ears of Brandon Beane, Sean McDermott. That's the kind of guys they covet. It's guys that help build this thing, the foundation of it. Kyle Williams, Lorenzo Alexander, Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, all those guys. This guy's got to come in here and bring championship caliber culture into the locker room. And you can't undersell what that means. And on top of that, he gives you a 10-plus sack guy that the Bills just haven't had. I mean, Jerry Hughes, after Mario Williams left, he's never been that. And so This is an upgrade over what you already had, which I thought was pretty good. You got a couple of young pieces, and then you have a couple players, on the interior, and Ed Oliver, Tremaine Edmonds at that second level. And then obviously Tre'Davious White coming off that injury. This is a big season for all of those guys, and they're all going to benefit from having Von Miller in the mix.
So really quick before Justus says his piece, was Von Miller, I didn't catch this, so I apologize if he answered this or somebody else already did. Was Von one of the two players that had approached the Bills prior to free agency starting about being
He's definitely
interested?
a big name.
Yeah, I think that it hasn't been officially reported by any of the people that had that report, but I think you can kind of deduce that he was one of those people. He admitted it.
Okay. All right. Awesome. All right, Justus, Von Miller on that defensive side of the ball. Take it away, man.
Yeah. I mean, that's so cool that the fact that you hear, two players, two guys are superstars, big names, approach the Buffalo Bills, and then to see us land one of those guys and to confirm that it's true, like not just a regular guy, but like an actual one of the big names it's pretty cool. That those reports aren't necessarily smoke screens and things like that, or just it's cool to know that Buffalo can attract that type of attention, and it be confirmed, and it comes to fruition. So that's pretty dope. But having Von Miller, I think, wow. So I feel like the two weakest units of this team last year were the trenches, the offensive line, defensive line, right? So going into this offseason, I'm thinking probably draft heavy offensive line and defensive line, right? But then Brandon Beane comes out in the first section of free agency and just completely reshapes the defensive line. And in my opinion, I feel like he made it a ton better. I feel like you love Harrison Phillips. I love Harrison Phillips in the production he brings, but I think Tim Settle can fill that role very well. And I think he can bring just as much, if not more, production. And I think also him, Shaq Lawson, Jordan Phillips bring a certain energy, to a team and a defense and a defensive line. And I think having that energy mixed with an elite physical talent like Von Miller for Gregory Rousseau, for Boogie Basham, for AJ Epinesa, I think that is supreme, because that energy on top of, for Groot, especially in my opinion, I feel like to see another freak athlete, who has done it at a high level his entire career, who's going to be a first ballot Hall of Famer, who can teach him everything he needs to know, who can show him the ropes, etc. I just feel like it's going to be a completely different defensive line. You get the guy from the Titans. I'm blanking on his name right now. I think it's Daquan Jones.
Daquan Jones, yep.
Yep.
Daquan Jones.
Daquan Jones, excuse me. He I was watching some of his film, the great run defender. So I think that helps us in that way, as far as our weakness in the defensive line, in the run game specifically. I think that Brandon Beane, wants to change the attitude of this defense a little bit. And I think having all those great balls of energy and production, all in one unified area, and I think that also helps Tremaine Edmonds and Matt Milano, and Taron Johnson in the run game, as far as, the gaps are filled so they can now see in the backfield and move, et cetera, et cetera. Like they don't have linemen running, full speed at them, and I think that'll lead to a higher production in their game as well. So I think it'll be, and I'm a big proponent of complementary football. I think reshaping that defensive line ultimately helps out the linebackers, which ultimately helps out the secondary, because we've seen the secondary shut people down, but then the quarterback has an ample amount of time to throw the ball. So eventually a pass gets completed. And I feel like having less time probably helps the secondary out a little bit more. They shut people down, maybe force more turnovers, increase the confidence, and you already have the best overall defense in the league. So I feel like this just makes it a ton better, which makes the offense better, which makes our team better. So I really love the Von Miller signing.
Yeah. So speaking of making teams better and not better, Justus, you had brought up Tim Settle, who is, a high character guy that everybody seems to really like. He was really liked in his time in Washington, but he comes in at a position where Buffalo just lost a man, and that being Harrison Phillips. So Harrison Phillips chose to sign in Minnesota. And Justus and I had talked a little bit about this last week and the fashion in which he left. But Harrison Phillips leaves, who is a guy that was drafted. I mean, he was, a pretty important pick to the Bills organization. Kyle Williams on his way out. He was supposed to be kind of like that next Kyle Williams. He gets hit with this massive injury. He, becomes this really big community guy. He becomes almost as equally loved in the community as like an Isaiah McKenzie type character or a Josh Allen, face of the franchise. And then he, in this free agency period, decides to go in sign with Minnesota. So I kind of want to make this a twofold conversation. One, what does losing Harrison Phillips mean or do to this defense? But then attached to that is, can a player like Tim Settle come in and fill the role that Harrison Phillips has left behind? And can he do it to the level that we expected Harrison Phillips to do it at?
So a couple things from me on this. I think more so than Harrison Phillips chose to sign with Minnesota, I think the Bills chose not to bring Harrison Phillips back. I think that's, if you read kind of between the lines, that's kind of what happened. You saw Harrison Phillips' note when he was leaving, his note to Buffalo, and talking about he's glad to sign with the Vikings, who saw his value. And I think,
that's
to
what
be fair,
Justus and I talked about last week.
Yeah, to be fair, 3 years and 21 million and guaranteed, I think it's 13, 14 million. That's a lot for a guy that's had 2 ACLs. I mean, you're not seeing a lot of guys that have that kind of injury really getting those kind of multi-year deals. It's usually you got to play 2 years in a row at a high level before somebody's willing to usually, trust you and pay that kind of money. Now, he had a really strong season, and I love Harrison Phillips. He deserves everything that he gets. But I think in a lot of ways, the Bills sneaky upgraded on the interior of the defensive line by letting him go and bringing in you mentioned Daquan Jones, who I was actually, I did a Twitter Spaces with Eric Wood the other day, and he used to play against Daquan Jones. He was younger in his career, and Eric was at the end of his, and he said he was just a what kicker. Every day that you came up against him, on the opposite side, you knew that it was going to be a physical kind of game where you're going to have to come for 60 snaps and get ready to be, hurting after the game. And so that's what the Bills kind of add at that, a true one technique. I think that people were frustrated with Star Lotulelei for years based on the contract that he gets. I think you get more value in Daquan Jones. He's going to play the position that Harrison Phillips started at down the stretch for the Bills last year. So I think potentially you can upgrade there. And then you have Tim Settle, who can be like that Swiss Army knife. You could put him, he said he could play anywhere from the 0 to the 9 technique. You can put him on the inside, you can play at the nose, he can rush at the 3, you could put him out at the 5, and he can rush off the edge. This guy has limitless potential in terms of what you can do with him. And then Jordan Phillips led this team in sacks in 2019 before he got that big payday, and they're going to ask him to be the 4th or 5th guy in the rotation. So they have so much depth. They've added so much size. I think they got better. And I think Von Miller, like I mentioned, and these additions on the interior are only potentially going to make things better for Ed Oliver.
All right, Justus, hit us with that wisdom, man.
I mean, I pretty much answered this in the last thing I said, so my bad for going into the topics. But I totally forgot about Ed Oliver. I didn't even add him to this equation. It just makes me even more excited. Again, I agree with Matt totally. I feel like we absolutely improved. We had our weaknesses last year. I feel like they were solid, but they got exposed sometimes. And when it happened, it was when it rained, it poured, So I think this is a D line that won't get exposed. They may have a bad game or so, here and there, but I don't think they'll be getting exposed, the way the previous one did. I think that the energy and the talent that these guys bring is just going to be beneficial to, like I said, Basham, Epinesa, and Rousseau. So again, I think it's amazing. Beans and Beans, the way he flipped his defensive line around. So super excited for it.
Yeah, and so Matt, like I had mentioned before, on the first episode of this show on the Bills fan base, which was last week at this time, that was one of the topics that Justus and I had talked about was Harrison Phillips and his note, to Buffalo. You said read between the lines. I think the lines were a bit blurred there because it did seem as kind of an outright kind of shot at the Bills front office for saying like there were other teams that offered me more money because they valued me more. And that was our discussion was largely, you were a good guy, and obviously you were Pancho Villa's, draft pick. You meant a lot to the franchise, but with the injuries that you had, and I mean, he really did kind of hit his stride late in the season last year. Obviously, Starr was out with injuries, and he was sitting out of games. But I mean, Harrison basically benched him at the end of the season and heading into the playoffs. He was the preferred guy to start over Starr. Even though, like you said, you've had 3 years, you've had these injuries, you haven't really performed to expectations. I'm not really sure what the expectation was from the Bills. Clearly, it was more than what he was offered. And so, I mean, I think he's going to do really well in Minnesota, but and this was part of the conversation that Justus and I had last week, choosing to leave Buffalo, having been here, right? This isn't a free agent coming in, hearing from other players that are now on that team that might have been in Buffalo, or, hearing from a Stephon Diggs or an Isaiah McKenzie or a Josh Allen. This is a guy who's been here and pretty much from the start, choosing to leave this team to go somewhere else, simply for, validating the feelings of feeling wanted and getting that money, while knowing what this team is capable of and where they're going in the future. It felt weird to me, but also at the same time, it doesn't, because these are guys that their entire job is to throw themselves at another man as fast as they can, to put them down as hard as they can so that they can win a game. And so, getting that money in case something bad were to happen, obviously, as we mentioned, Harrison Phillips' injury history is pretty extensive and pretty major. I kind of get why he would go after the money, but also it's like, man, like, we're so close, don't you want to be there? And so it just felt a little bit off. But like you said, I mean, I felt like you didn't really have to read in between the lines. It felt like the lines were blurred there a little bit. But I mean, that's all I have to say. Does anybody else want to?
I feel like it's a little. I don't know. Just me personally, like Matt alluded to, he has multiple ACLs, and he's a big guy, and he's a good player. I like him as a player, but to say we don't see the value in it, and so what Matt said as far as they didn't really care if he left or not, or he didn't say that, but in so many words. I don't know. I feel like they would have liked to keep him on some level. So I don't know if it's fair to say that like we didn't value him, because like this is a far better roster than the Vikings. Like, of course the Vikings have extra money to give you, so I feel like if you want to win a Super Bowl, sometimes you kind of, and I'll never be mad at somebody for like taking their money, like get your money. But I'm saying to say that we didn't value him, I just think that's a little unfair.
I don't think that was a shot at the fan base. I don't know if that's what you're referring to. I think it was more just like, in the moment, like these are competitive guys. Like he wanted to get his, like, and Brandon Beane even says it when he sends these guys out in free agency. He said the same thing to Milano and Feliciano and Darrell Williams last year. It just so happened that they were able to come to an agreement before they hit it. Is that, listen, go out and find out what your value is. At the end of the day, you may only have a chance to sign one big contract. For Harrison Phillips, this was a tough emotional thing for him, because I think, number one, he is so important and so intertwined into the community that he's got he's going to keep his foundation running in Buffalo, even now that he's in Minnesota. He's really close with Josh Allen. He's, he was big part of the culture here. So I think in the building, so I think it was hard for him, but you have to kind of prioritize your financial future. And if he suffers another ACL, he's never going to have a chance to get $13 million guaranteed. He'll be playing on $1 million contracts for the rest of his career, potentially. So this was something that he kind of had to do. And I think he was just a little bit disappointed that, the Bills maybe didn't value all the work that he did. And this is just me guessing. This isn't coming
Right.
from Harrison. All the work that he did to help create that culture. And sometimes, the two sides, it's a business. It's hard to kind of, I think once he gets down the road, I'm not closing any doors on Harrison Phillips in 2 years. Once that money runs out, that guaranteed money, if the Minnesota Vikings move on, he doesn't end up back in Buffalo in some way. But it's sometimes you got to kind of go away for a little while to return, kind of like Shaq and Jordan Phillips have.
So this is like the third time you've done this. Are you reading my mind? Because that's exactly what I was going to bring up next. Is you saw Jordan Phillips and Shaq return after a couple of years, and I mean almost exactly what you just said is what Jordan said. He said, pretty much the equivalent of you don't know what you got till it's gone. He went out, he got the money, he went to Arizona, and he realized the entire time he was there, which is another crazy thing, right? We talked about Von Miller and being a big name approaching Buffalo, but this is a guy who is pretty beloved by the fan base and by the team, leaves and spends the entirety of his time while playing for another NFL team being like, man, if I were only in Buffalo right now, if I was only playing in a Bills uniform right now and watching all of those games and I mean, literally showing up in a Star Lotulelei jersey. Now, I like Star and I like what he did for the run defense. I don't know a single person other than Jordan Phillips who has a Star Lotulelei jersey. I don't. Maybe you guys do. I do not. So he just it's amazing to see where this team is now from where it was before. But that was going to be my question to you both was, A, would you as fans be open to having him back? But B, do you think that the team in a couple of years down the road, albeit, with the condition that he stays healthy, would welcome him back? So thank you for reading my mind. So we didn't have to keep going with that. But speaking of another guy who is potentially moving on, who I'm sure that they would keep the door open for and come back, Ryan Bates, who's a restricted free agent, was signed to an offer sheet by the Bears. Now the Bills have, and Matt or Justus, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the Bills have 5 days to sign that and attempt to match in order to bring him back. So if I'm wrong, please go ahead and correct me on that. But if not, do we think, not knowing what the specifics are, do we think the Bills can match it? A. B, do we think that even if they can, that they will?
This is a complicated one. I mean, a lot of people have been hitting me up asking, like, why did the Bills put the low tender on him? Like, there's 3 levels, of compensation. You can kind of put a tender on a player that's a restricted free agent. The one that they put on on Bates was the lowest. It was like $2.8 million. Then you can go up to I think it's like 3 point something or 4 point something, and that second level will yield you a second round pick back if that team signs. If he signs with another team and you choose not to match the offer, you can get a second round pick back. Or if you go to the highest level and pay whatever it ends up being, that tender, you get a first round pick back. Now, the Bills chose with Bates to go all the way down at the bottom level, which means if he signs somewhere and the Bills don't match, they lose the player and they don't get any picks back. So, there's some frustration I've sensed amongst the fan base, but a couple things you got to think about here. This is a guy in Ryan Bates that, as good as he was, and as much as I was a card carrying member of the Bates Hive at times over the last couple of years, thinking that he should have probably got some run sooner based on what I saw in training camp and different preseason games. He is a former undrafted guy that they traded for in camp, a versatile piece, but mostly thought of as a depth piece until he kind of earned that starting role down the stretch. He's someone that I think, as much as the Bills would like to have him back in the mix, if it's going to cost too much, probably view it as a replaceable piece, whether you want to approach it in the draft, free agency. I think Ryan Bates is a starter level player in the NFL, but he played really well. And depending on what that number comes in with the Bears, if they're willing to pay him $3-4 million, that might just be too rich for Brandon Beane at a position where he might be able to find value. I mean, he's done it over and over again over the last couple of years. I mean, the first contract that he brought in John Feliciano on was super low. He drafted Cody Ford. He drafted Wyatt Teller. He found undrafted guys like Ike Bucker and Ryan Bates. So he feels pretty confident in the ability to find depth. And I think that's more about what it's going to be. So we'll see. The fact that they put that low tender makes me think that maybe they don't match it depending on what that number is. But we will see. He'll be missed. He can play all 5 positions. He's liked in the room. He's a really good glue guy, culture guy. So we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, I personally hope he comes back. I like him. I like the way he was able to step up, when needed. And the biggest moment, honestly, is down the stretch of the season and into the postseason, and they all played really well. The offensive line really shined, toward the end of the season. So it's pretty cool to have him back. And also, I feel like you upgrade at the guard position, getting Saffold, or as far as releasing Williams. I think Saffold is an upgrade personally. So I would like to see Bates back to kind of complete the starters, but again, like Matt said, Bean tends to find value anywhere, not to mention to have the roster this far along, before the draft, before the second wave of free agency. I think we are in an extreme advantage to really do whatever we want in the draft. So I feel like you can find a lot of value as far as offensive line goes in the draft to find starters and find depth. So I hope personally that Ryan Bates comes back. So I don't know if they'll do it, but I just like I said, I hope so.
So Justus, starting with you here really quick, and then going to Matt after. Assume that they do not bring him back. Assume that Ryan Bates signs with the Bears organization. He's now with Justin Fields. Do you think that Bean goes after an offensive lineman in the draft, which I think a lot of the mock drafts and conversations have been about the fact that regardless, it seems like that's a direction that they're going to go in. But assuming that they do, where do you go ahead and take an offensive lineman? Because some people have, offensive linemen being taken in the first at 25. A lot of conversation has been about the Bills trading up, not specifically for offensive linemen, but there have been some conversations recently in the Bills Mafia Twitterverse about trading up in the first round. But then there's been also conversations about taking offensive linemen in the second, third round. So, Justus, starting with you, if you're Brandon Beane, so we're going to do a little bit of armchair GM's work here. If you're Brandon Beane, where are you taking an offensive lineman, if you are at all, assuming that Ryan Bates does not come back?
If Ryan Bates doesn't come back, that moves to probably priority number 2 or 3 for me. I'm a really big proponent of getting a playmaker in the first round. I feel like we don't need it, but I feel like having another playmaker on this dynamic offense, I feel like would just take us over the top. So that's kind of what I'm hoping for. But then I feel like you can either address corner or you can address offensive line. Me personally, I would address offensive line in the second round because I feel like corner is an odd position where Trey White will be back eventually. And I feel like they're comfortable with Dane at the 2. And I feel like they're very comfortable with Taryn at the 3. So it's kind of like you need a CB1, CB2, player for a limited amount of time. So I'm not sure if they'll invest a second round pick into that, maybe a third round pick. But as far as offensive line, if Ryan Bates doesn't come back, you probably want to get a starter caliber player, or at least a guy who can, battle it out for that starting position. And I feel like, that second round, maybe, trade back into the second round after you make another pick or whatever the case may be. Because again, I feel like 5th, 6th, 7th rounds for the Bills, these guys aren't necessarily going to make this roster sometimes, and I know Bean is amazing at finding value at those, at those spots, but, there's only but so many spots on the team, and he's already filled out the roster so well. I feel like you could prioritize offensive line pretty heavily.
All right, awesome. Matt, where do you think that the Bills could potentially go after an offensive line addition in this upcoming draft? Or do you think that this is even maybe something that they could address if they don't address in the draft, that they could address later in free agency? But I know a lot of the talk has been about them taking at least 1, possibly 2 offensive line assets in this upcoming draft.
Yeah, I think I've been saying it for a while now. Why not take the same approach that you took last year? You went on the edge last year at the tackle spots. You took two really super athletic guys. Find your flavor of interior offensive lineman. You have Aaron Cromer now as the offensive line coach, and double up on the interior, whether it be somebody that has maybe some center guard flexibility that maybe you want to start developing the next center, because as good as Mitch Morse was last year, he's getting older and he costs a lot of money. And that as you start to get into future years and you have to start, paying the tab for Josh Allen's contract, and they can move some money around, don't get me wrong, but you probably want to get a little bit more cost effective on that offensive line. And so, I wouldn't rule out anything. If the first three picks, day one and day two, Brandon Beane, he's not lying about it. I mean, I've had conversations with him, away from the microphone, and, it's not just bluster when he says, I'm going best player available on the board. It's like you fill the holes in free agency, and then whoever that player is, that elite player that you feel like at that spot that you can add to your team, that's who they're going to take. So trying to project when they take players is really tough to do. Now on day 4 or on day 3, yeah, I could see in the 4th, 5th, and 6th and 7th round them really starting to attack needs. And if they feel like interior offensive line is a need, if they don't get Ryan Bates, it's definitely a need. I mean, Roger Saffold's old. He's had some injury issues. I think he's an upgrade, minor upgrade over Darrell Williams too, because of his experience in Aaron Cromer's system. But that other one is looking like Cody Ford right now. So I don't anticipate them making a big splash in free agency on the interior of the offensive line at this point. So I think they got to be very aggressive at that position. But I think you can kind of find value on day 3 at that spot.
All right, awesome. Really quick side question before we head into this last one, because it just popped into my head. I don't know why, and I'm sorry about that. But quick hit, Matt, Isaiah Hodgins, do you think that there's a chance that he makes the 53-man this year?
It's definitely a chance. I think that there's a ton of talent there, and I'm kind of excited to watch him in training camp. He was the training camp darling before he got hurt as a rookie, and so I'd like to see what he looks like and what they can kind of use him. The thing that kind of is tough for Hodgins for me is like the signing of OJ Howard. I feel like knocks him down a peg. Like that was maybe the role that he could have maybe slipped into, and like OJ Howard's a tight end, but they're going to use him in a lot of interesting personnel packages, and where they line him up and what they ask him to do is going to be almost just as important as what he can do as a pass catcher as anything else. So I thought that Hodgins can maybe fill that big slot role and get on the field that way. So I'll be interested to see if that doesn't, make it a little bit tougher for him. But yeah, I do think that there's a chance.
All right. Thank you for satisfying my personal curiosity. So with this last bit, before we head into it, Matt, again, thank you so much for doing this. I don't suspect, because I've had a fun time here tonight, I don't suspect that this is the last time that I will ever DM you to ask you to do something like this again. So if you're open to it, I would definitely love to have you back for sure. And Justus, of course, thank you so much for doing this, and then, teaching me some of this behind the scenes stuff as quick as possible tonight. So, but as we get into this last piece of conversation, we saw the beginnings of this unfold. And I don't know if unfold is necessarily the correct word to use, but in Brandon Beane's press conference, it was asked about the Washington Buffalo professional relationship that's there, because the front office side of this, I mean, really the entire NFL is a relationship driven game. And so obviously with JD McKissick saying that he's going to come to Buffalo and then not coming to Buffalo, and it turns out that Washington did not stop pursuing, even though the agent did his job and said, hey, we've already agreed to come here in Buffalo. Brandon Beane was pretty upset about it in his press conference. Now, the next week following this week, Monday, Brandon Beane made an appearance on the Pat McAfee show, and he seemed not as angry about it, not as stern about the issue. He was making more of a joke of it, saying, hey, I'm a little bit older now, so, I'm going to get past this ish pretty quickly. But he still talked about the fact that he knows a lot of people that are in that front office. Obviously, he knows the head coach of the Washington Commanders. I almost said football team. The Washington Commanders, because of Coach Rivera's time in Carolina. So I want to talk a little bit about, is the relationship damaged permanently versus temporarily, or, really how damaged is it? Because it's not against, league rules, but it just seems kind of like one of those unspoken ethical, like terms of respect kind of thing that was violated here by Washington in the JD McKissic deal. So Justus, I'm going to throw this one to you first, and then Matt, I'm going to let you finish that one off. But what do we think is happening, with the Bills and Commanders relationship going forward?
Well, I mean, I think Brandon Beane is a professional in the sense that, I mean, I'm sure they have professional relationships. Obviously, I don't have like insider information, but I'm sure they are cordial. Maybe personable, know each other's family type of deal. But I think that they'll probably keep it professional. If there's something Brandon Beane likes and he sees value, and the Commanders happen to be a gateway to that player in some way, shape, or form, then I'm sure he'll make the call and see what they're about. I'm sure he'll listen to their calls and see what they're about. So I expect him to do what's best for the Buffalo Bills at all times, really. So I think, yeah, he seemed pretty ticked, but again, Brandon Beane's fine. This roster's fine the way it is. We'll get a running back at some point. So I think he'll keep it professional.
It's hard to say, man. I don't really know. You're right. Like, he did seem less agitated about it, but their relationship goes back a long way. I mean, him and Ron Rivera and Sean McDermott, it goes back to Carolina, and there's obviously a lot of shared conversations and trust when they were together there. And to go, your separate ways to different teams, the dynamic always changes, but it definitely seemed like it was serious for him to get that emotional in the press conference about it, and how mad he was. It was definitely something. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I know that they had joint practices with Carolina a couple years ago, and it was a kumbaya type of situation down there with Ron and Sean and Brandon and all the folks that had kind of crossed paths in 16 and 15. They went to the Super Bowl together. So yeah, it's impossible to say like what the long-term ramifications are of it, but I'm wondering if, the details of it all are kind of funny too. Like, hearing Brandon Beane talk about it, he put it all on the Commanders, but like the way that McKissic talked about it, it definitely seemed like there might have been more of a role the agents played in this than it seemed at the start. So I don't know, maybe the Commanders folks that were involved, dial up Brandon Beane, apologize, get all the cards on the table. It's impossible to know how that all plays out, but I don't think it really matters. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of relationships between teams and front office executives that are, less cordial than others. And I'm sure they still find a way to do business. I mean, at the end of the day, you got to find a way to make your team better. And if that means dealing with somebody that you don't like to try to acquire an asset that you think can do that, I think most guys, especially Brandon Beane, who's been so good at it the last couple of years, find a way to put it behind him.
All right. Awesome. Thank you. Well, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to throw up for all the viewers, changing our ticker here. If you want to follow myself, Justus, and or Matt, if you're already not, you can go ahead. All of our Twitter usernames are at the bottom. You can go ahead and follow us. Matt, again, thank you so much, man. I do appreciate this. You were supposed to be on last week, but obviously the pressers ran late. But I mean, I literally, DM'd you about 6 hours before the show. And you said an immediate yes. So I'm very appreciative of that, especially because we haven't talked before. We don't have a professional relationship, prior to this. So I'm very appreciative of the fact that you came on and spent some time talking with us. If you're not, you don't have to answer now. I'm not going to put the pressure on you, but I definitely would love to talk to you again sometime down the road in the future if you're up to it. So, thank you very much. Is there anything that you would like to tell the people?
No, thanks for having me on, guys. It was great to have a conversation. You can find all my Bills coverage over at my Twitter account's the best place, but the Shout Buffalo Football podcast live every Wednesday night. We'll be live in Florida this next week, so a couple episodes that should be fun. We're gonna get into mock draft season, which is, I know a lot of football fans get excited about those.
Yeah, I'm one of the off-season nerds. I like the games, but I'm one of those I like the draft and free agency. So I will definitely be tuning into that. You can almost take that to the bank. It just depends on what happens That's what happens when you're on call 24/7 for work. So thank you again, Justus, as always, man. Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this and for joining me, joining us. Is there anything that you would like to tell the people before we get out of here?
Man, just thank you for having me. I appreciate you, having me on your show. Your inaugural show was really dope. This was a great show. Appreciate Matt for coming on. I had a great time, great conversation. So, and thank you, everybody for tuning in and listening as well. You guys are awesome.
Yeah, thank you guys, because without you, it would just be the three of us talking. So I'm very appreciative of the love and support that you showed with my first show. It's actually the highest grossing show I've ever had. So I'm extremely appreciative. Thank you. Thank you for tuning into this one. I've seen the numbers going up and up. So I'm extremely appreciative. If you guys want to do a quick favor before you jump out, be sure to follow, like, subscribe, share. I don't know, write it down on a piece of paper, attach it to an owl, and send it to somebody that you know. Be a friend, tell a friend about Buffalo fan base, and of course about the Bills Shout podcast that Matt has and all the work that he's doing. So thank you guys so much, and I will see you next week on a new episode of the Rust Belt Report. And with that, go Bills and go Sabres, because God, we're gonna have two good sports teams in this town, and we're not gonna be able to handle it. Go Bills.